You can call the cops, I told her, sliding the pool gate shut until the latch clicked like the last word in an argument. But when they get here, make sure you tell them whose water you're standing next to. The smell of chlorine hung thick in the July heat, sharp and clean, mixing with sunscreen, cut grass, and the faint burnt plastic scent of an overworked speaker somewhere in Brenda Whitmore's little crowd. Wet flip-flops squeaked on my stamped concrete patio. Ice clinked in plastic cups. Somebody's kid was still laughing until Brenda threw one hand in the air like she was conducting the whole scene, and suddenly the sound died out. That was the kind of power she liked best, the kind that made other people go quiet. My name is Ethan Walker, and that pool behind me wasn't some neighborhood perk, wasn't a shared amenity, and sure as hell wasn't under HOA control. My father built it in 1998 with his own money, his own permits, and 6 weekends of sweat that smelled like concrete dust, black coffee, and South Carolina summer rain. I learned to swim in that water. I learned to skim leaves out of it before school. I learned, from the man who built it, that private property doesn't stop being private just because a woman in a pastel blazer says the word community often enough. Brenda Whitmore had been president of our HOA for 4 years, and in that time she'd turned a quiet cul-de-sac into her own little stage. She drove a pearl-white Lexus, wore tennis skirts like she was headed to Wimbledon at all hours of the day, and carried that smile women like her perfected sometime after age 45, the one that looked polite from a distance and venomous up close. She talked about standards the way preachers talk about salvation. Lawn standards. Fence standards. Trash can standards. Flag standards. And lately, because the subdivision didn't have a pool of its own, she decided my backyard was the answer to a problem nobody had hired her to solve. It started small. A text asking whether residents could tour the grounds for a summer social idea. Then an email suggesting my pool could be integrated into future community planning. Then 2 Saturdays ago, I came home from Lowe's and found 3 women from the board leaning over my back fence in floppy hats, measuring sight lines like they were pricing out a hotel. I told Brenda then, calm and clear, that the pool sat entirely on my parcel, outside HOA ownership, outside HOA budget, and outside HOA imagination. She smiled like I was confused. She said, "Ethan, when you live in a neighborhood, you have to think bigger than yourself." That's the sentence people like Brenda always use right before they try to take something. So that afternoon, when she marched through my side gate with 6 residents, 2 coolers, and a folding sign that said Willowbrook Summer Splash, I was ready. I had the key in my pocket. I had the paper trail in my office. I had every email, every property survey, every camera angle stored and backed up. What Brenda saw was one man in work boots telling her no in front of an audience. What I saw was a woman making the biggest mistake of her summer in front of witnesses. She stepped closer, perfume cutting through the chlorine, and lifted her phone so I could see the screen. "I'm calling the police," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. I nodded once and looked past her toward the front driveway, where the afternoon shimmered off the pavement like heat over a grill. "Good," I said. "I've been waiting for you to do that." The first patrol car rolled up slow, tires crunching over the loose gravel at the edge of my driveway, red and blue lights washing across the white fence and the surface of the pool in broken ribbons. The water turned police colors before either officer even stepped out. I remember that detail because it felt almost theatrical, like Brenda had finally gotten the stage she always wanted. She straightened the collar of her sleeveless blouse, tucked one strand of highlighted hair behind her ear, and put on that injured citizen expression so fast it would have impressed a trial lawyer. Officer Daniel Ruiz came through the gate first, mid-40s, sun-lined face, calm eyes, hand resting near his belt more out of habit than tension. Behind him was a younger deputy, tall, clean-cut, notebook already in hand, taking in the patio furniture. The coolers, the crowd, and me standing there with one palm still resting on the locked gate. The air felt heavy enough to drink. Cicadas buzzed in the oak trees behind the property line. Somewhere down the block, a lawnmower droned like a tired engine. Brenda did not wait for introductions. She launched right in, voice sharp with outrage, saying I had denied residents access to a community recreational area, that I had created a hostile situation, that children were being excluded from a facility supported by neighborhood Jews. She said it fast, confidently, like she had rehearsed the language in the mirror. I did not interrupt her. That was the first thing my father ever taught me about people who build their authority out of pure volume. Let them talk. Most of them will hand you the rope themselves. Officer Ruiz listened without changing expression, then turned to me. Sir, is this your property? He asked. Just that. No accusation. No edge. Just a clean question cutting through all of Brenda's noise. I told him yes. I told him the pool, the deck, the equipment pad, the fence line, and every square foot under our shoe sat on Lot 14, the parcel my family had owned since 1989. Brenda let out this short, polished laugh like I had just claimed to own the moon. That is not accurate, she said. The community has maintenance interest and usage rights. Maintenance interest. Usage rights. Those were not phrases regular people used around a backyard pool on a Sunday afternoon. Those were phrases Brenda used when she wanted a lie to sound expensive. I looked at Officer Ruiz and said, "Would you like to see the survey?" His eyebrows moved just a fraction. Brenda's smile did not disappear, but it tightened at the corners. That was when I knew she had made the same mistake she always made. She thought confidence could beat paperwork. She thought because most people gave in, I would too. What she did not understand was that I had spent the last 3 months getting very familiar with every inch of my property and every line inside the HOA documents. After Dad passed, I found boxes in the garage stacked behind old filter cartridges and rusted patio hardware. Manila. Folders. Permit packets. Tax maps. Inspection cards. A full paper trail smelling faintly of cardboard, dust, and machine oil. I sat on this very patio night after night under the yellow bug light, reading until midnight while the pool pump hummed beside me. At first I did it because grief makes you hold on to practical things. Then I kept going because Brenda started circling. The first email had arrived in May, asking whether I had considered opening the pool for selected neighborhood events. By June, she was talking about shared benefit. By July, she was saying community expectation. I never said yes. I never came close. And standing there with 2 deputies in my backyard and half the block sweating behind her sunglasses, Brenda was about to learn that I had not spent those nights reading for nothing. Officer Ruiz held out one hand, and I stepped inside through the back door, the air conditioning hitting my skin with that dry, recycled chill every southern house learns to depend on in July. From the patio, I could still hear Brenda talking, lower now but no less relentless, feeding the younger deputy a version of events polished smooth enough to sound official. I went straight to the built-in cabinet beside the breakfast nook, the one Dad used to call the real safe because nobody ever looks behind homeowner manuals and old tax binders. My fingers slid past pool chemical receipts, warranty folders, and a cracked leather planner before landing on the blue accordion file I had labeled in black marker 3 weeks earlier, Lot 14. The tab edges were soft from use. I had opened that file so many nights the paper smell had become familiar, like dry cardboard and ink and the faint metallic scent of old staples. When I carried it back outside, the younger deputy noticed the label first. His eyes dropped to the file, then to Brenda. That shift was small, but I caught it. People like Brenda survive on momentum. The moment paper enters the conversation, momentum starts leaking out of them. I set the file on the patio table still slick with condensation rings and opened it carefully, one document at a time, like I was laying out tools. First came the county plat map with the surveyor stamp still crisp at the bottom corner. Then the permit packet from 1998 for the original pool construction. Then the inspection sign-off. Then the deed language showing the parcel boundaries running clean around the house, the deck, and the entire fenced yard. Ruiz studied each page without rushing. The younger deputy leaned closer, pen hovering. Brenda folded her arms and made a little scoffing sound, but it came out thinner than before. That does not reflect the amended use agreement, she said. There it was again. Another phrase dressed up to sound legal. I turned to her. The one from your email?" I asked. A few people in her little group looked at each other. Brenda did not answer right away, which told me I had landed exactly where I wanted to. See, about a month earlier, after she started floating this fantasy that my pool was somehow part of the neighborhood lifestyle package, she sent me a 3-page document with a cheerful header and enough bold print to scare a tired homeowner into nodding along. It was called a shared recreational understanding. That alone told me it was nonsense. Real property rights do not hide behind language that sounds like a yoga retreat waiver. But Brenda counted on presentation. She counted on logos, letterhead, and people being too busy to read past the first paragraph. I read every line. There was no county filing number. No attached amendment to the recorded covenants. No signatures from me, from my father, or from anyone who had ever owned this house. Just HOA branding and a lot of wishful thinking dressed up as policy. Would you like to see that too? I asked Ruiz. For the first time since arriving, he glanced directly at Brenda before looking back at me. Yes, sir, he said. I pulled out a printed copy of her email thread, complete with timestamps, attachments, and my reply stating in plain English that the pool was private property and not subject to community access. I had also included a copy of the survey in that email, which meant Brenda had known the truth for weeks. The younger deputy took a breath through his nose, the way people do when something shifts from messy misunderstanding into possible intentional misrepresentation. Out by the fence, the crowd had gone quiet enough that I could hear the pool filter kick on, a steady mechanical hum under the cicadas. Brenda's smile was gone now. Not cracked. Gone. In its place was that flat, tight expression people get when the room stops behaving the way they planned. And standing there with the late sun reflecting off the water and her own email sitting open on the table between us, she was finally starting to understand that I had not been waiting for the police. I had been waiting for her to lie in front of them. Officer Ruiz did not say much after that. He did not have to. The silence did more work than any speech could have. He looked at the email again, then at the survey, then at Brenda, and in that order alone I could feel the ground shifting under her polished little performance. The younger deputy flipped back a page in his notebook and rewrote something, slower this time, more deliberate. Brenda noticed it too. You could see it in the way her shoulders pulled tighter, in the way she reached for confidence like someone fumbling for a light switch in a room that had just gone dark. This is being taken out of context, she said, and her voice had changed. It still had that practiced smoothness, but now there was a thin edge underneath it, a little dryness, like the air had suddenly gotten harder to breathe. The board has discussed this extensively. Residents have every reason to believe this space was intended for shared enjoyment. Intended. Another word with no legal weight and all the arrogance in the world. I leaned one hand against the back of a patio chair and watched her carefully. Brenda always did this when facts cornered her. She stopped talking about what was true and started talking about what people felt entitled to. It was never about ownership with her. It was about habit. About power repeated often enough that neighbors forgot to question it. The pool pump droned beside the equipment wall, low and steady. Water slipped over the tile edge into the skimmer with a soft sucking sound. A bead of sweat ran down between my shoulder blades under my shirt, but my hand stayed steady. That mattered. People like Brenda fed on reactions. They wanted flustered words, raised voices, messy emotions they could point at and call instability. I had learned that lesson the long way. The first month after Dad died, I could barely walk past the deep end without hearing his voice telling me to watch my footing on wet concrete. Then Brenda started sending notices. At first they came dressed as suggestions. Community concern. Shared access inquiry. Summer youth opportunity. Every message carried that same fake civic tone, like she was not trying to take something, just trying to help me understand how generous I ought to be with what was mine. I answered politely the first 2 times. The third time I attached the deed map. The fourth time I quoted the actual covenant language that limited HOA amenities to the clubhouse lot, tennis court easement, and front entrance landscaping. My father had hated paperwork, but he kept everything. That was his quiet genius. He built things with concrete and wrenches, but he protected them with folders and signatures. Brenda had mistaken my silence for confusion. Worse, she had mistaken grief for weakness. Officer Ruiz closed the file and rested his hand on it a second before speaking. He said, looking directly at Brenda now, "Do you have any recorded documents showing this property was transferred, assigned, or otherwise designated for HOA use?" That question landed like a brick dropped into still water. Not loud. Just final. Brenda blinked once. Then twice. "I do not carry board records with me to social events," she said, trying for dignity and landing somewhere closer to irritation. The younger deputy's pen stopped moving. Ruiz did not react to the dodge. Then at this time, he said evenly, "Everything presented indicates this is private residential property." You could almost hear the heat settle over the patio. One of the women behind Brenda shifted her tote bag higher on her shoulder. A man in a golf shirt took one careful step backward like he had suddenly remembered somewhere else to be. Even the kids, who had spent the last 10 minutes whispering and kicking at the concrete, had gone still. Brenda looked around and realized the crowd that had come here expecting a free pool day was now watching her the way people watch a magician after they notice the trick. But she was not done. Not Brenda. Women like her never stop at the first warning. They double down because retreat feels too much like being ordinary. She lifted her chin, glanced toward the locked gate, and said, "Fine. Then perhaps we should discuss the money." And the second those words left her mouth, I knew she had just opened the door to the part one had really been waiting for. Brenda should have stopped there. Any reasonable person would have. The deputies had seen the survey, the permits, the email trail, and the simple truth sitting in black and white on my patio table. But reason was never Brenda's strong suit. She lived on escalation the way some people live on caffeine. If a door closed, she looked for a window. If a rule failed, she reached for leverage. And when she said, "Perhaps we should discuss the money," I heard exactly what I had been waiting to hear for 3 straight weeks. Not because I enjoyed being right. Because I finally knew she was about to say the quiet part where everybody could hear it. The late sun was dropping lower now, turning the water a darker blue and throwing long bars of shadow across the deck. The concrete still held the day's heat through the soles of my boots. Somewhere near the fence line, somebody opened a can drink with a sharp metallic snap, then thought better of taking a sip. Officer Ruiz stayed still, one hand resting lightly on the file. "What money?" he asked. Brenda folded her arms tighter and looked at him the way people look at store clerks when they cannot believe they have to explain themselves. "The maintenance contribution," she said. "Residents have been paying seasonal recreation support fees for the last 2 months. This property has already been represented as part of the community summer access plan." There it was. Plain as chlorine in July air. A couple of people behind her shifted so fast you could hear the rubber soles scrape. One woman in oversized sunglasses turned her head toward Brenda so sharply I thought the frame might snap. A man near the gate frowned and said, under his breath but not nearly quiet enough, "What fees?" I kept my face still, but inside I felt the whole story lock into place. Because 3 weeks earlier, my next-door neighbor, Carol Simmons, had walked over with a casserole dish and a question. Carol is the kind of woman who apologizes before she says your name too loudly. She had that worried look good people get when they suspect they have been dragged into something crooked by accident. She asked whether I had approved a special assessment tied to backyard pool upkeep. I remember the smell of baked cheese and rosemary drifting off that dish while I just stared at her. She said Brenda had sent out a cheerful board email announcing a temporary summer recreation fund, $125 per household, to offset cleaning, insurance, deck preservation, and guest liability support for an expanded neighborhood amenity package. Expanded neighborhood amenity package. Even then, it sounded like a lie trying to wear a blazer. Carol showed me the payment request on her phone right there in my kitchen. HOA letterhead. Treasurer copied. Deadline highlighted in red. No mention of my name. No signed agreement. Just enough polished language to make tired homeowners assume the board had authority. I called the HOA treasurer the next morning and got voicemail. I emailed the board and got silence from everyone except Brenda, who replied that the matter was an internal administrative issue and not subject to individual dispute. That was the moment I stopped treating her like a pushy neighbor and started treating her like a person building a paper trap. So I did what Dad would have done. I documented. I printed the fee notice Carol forwarded me. Then 2 more neighbors sent theirs after I asked a careful question or two. Same amount. Same wording. Same implication that my private pool had somehow become a line item in the neighborhood budget. I put every page into the blue accordion file and waited. I waited because some people only expose themselves when they think authority has arrived to protect them. Officer Ruiz looked at Brenda for a long second, then asked the question that made the air go thin. Are you saying residents were charged HOA funds or assessments for access to this private property? Brenda opened her mouth, closed it, then lifted her chin like posture alone could save her. The younger deputy stopped writing altogether. Behind them, the pool filter hummed and the water shimmered against the tile like it was listening too. And all around Brenda, the faces that had shown up expecting a summer party were starting to look a lot more like an angry audience. For the first time all afternoon, Brenda did not have a ready-made answer. She stood there with the last of the sunlight catching the hard line of her cheekbone, phone still in one hand, and the whole patio seemed to lean toward her waiting. Cicadas buzzed in the trees beyond the fence. The pool pump kept up its low steady hum. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked twice and went quiet. Small sounds. Normal sounds. But on my patio they felt magnified, because everybody knew something had shifted. Brenda finally cleared her throat and said the fees were temporary community planning assessments, not access charges, as if changing the label could change the reality. Officer Ruiz did not move. How many households paid? He asked. Brenda tried to smile again, but the expression came out brittle, like thin glass under pressure. I do not handle the accounting personally, she said. That was not an answer, and everybody heard it. Carol Simmons stepped forward before I could say a word, casserole dish long forgotten, still holding the printed HOA notice she must have tucked into her tote bag when she came over. Her voice shook at first, then steadied. She said she paid $125 because the board email stated the fee supported seasonal access and liability coverage tied to the pool amenity. Another neighbor, Mark Delaney, lifted his hand and said he paid too. Then a woman near the fence said she had not paid yet but received the same notice with a late fee warning in bold red letters. The mood changed fast after that. You could feel it in the way people stopped standing behind Brenda and started standing apart from her. The younger deputy began asking for names, addresses, screenshots, payment confirmations. His pen moved quick now, not because the scene was confusing but because it had become very clear. Brenda kept trying to interrupt, saying the matter was being mischaracterized, saying residents had misunderstood an internal board initiative, saying legal review was pending. Every sentence sounded weaker than the one before it. That was the thing about authority built on bluff. It looked solid until real questions hit it from more than one direction. I reached back into the file and pulled out the sheet I had saved for last, a printed screenshot of the HOA budget summary Brenda had sent in the June newsletter. She called it the Summer Enhancement Reserve. $5,000 projected. Cleaning support, hospitality supplies, insurance adjustment, and miscellaneous recreation needs. Not one word of it had anything to do with my permission, my property, or my actual expenses, because I had never agreed to any of it. I handed the page to Officer Ruiz. He read it once, then again slower. The younger deputy leaned over to look. Brenda saw the document and the color drained right out of her face. I had found that summary 2 weeks earlier after Carol forwarded the newsletter and asked why my pool chemicals were apparently a neighborhood expense now. I remember sitting at my kitchen counter that night, the overhead light buzzing faintly, a glass of melted ice water sweating onto a coaster while I read every line 3 times. Dad used to say that when people lie on paper, they eventually forget paper keeps a memory longer than they do. He was right. Brenda had gotten too comfortable. Too many years of nobody pushing back. Too many meetings where people nodded because they were tired or busy or did not want to become her next target. Officer Ruiz looked up from the page and asked, very plainly, did the board vote to collect money tied to use of this private property without the owner's consent? Brenda said the board had broad discretionary authority for community recreation planning. Again, not an answer. The deputy wrote that down too. By then the sun had dropped low enough that the pool lights clicked on automatically, glowing pale blue under the surface. The water looked calm. That was the part one remember most. All that noise, all that scrambling, and the water just sat there smooth and clear like it had known from the start who it belonged to. Then Carol spoke again, louder this time, and asked the question nobody there could ignore anymore. Brenda, she said, where did our money go? Brenda opened her mouth, then closed it again when she realized there was no version of this that sounded clean anymore. The pool lights cast that pale blue shimmer across the patio, catching the edges of plastic cups and chrome chair legs, turning everybody's faces a little colder than they had looked 10 minutes earlier. The air still smelled like chlorine and cut grass, but now there was something else mixed into it too, that sharp electric scent a room gets when the truth finally shows up and nobody can pretend not to see it. Carol stood there waiting, arms folded tight across her chest, and Mark Delaney had his phone out scrolling through old payment confirmations with the kind of irritated focus people usually save for bank fraud. Brenda tried to buy herself a little time. She said the funds were being held in reserve pending board allocation. She said accounting always took time. She said there were procedural details residents would not understand without context. Every word sounded thinner than the one before it. Officer Ruiz did not raise his voice. He just asked where the funds were deposited and whether there was a board-approved ledger showing how those payments had been categorized. Brenda said the treasurer handled records. Ruiz asked for the treasurer's name. She gave it. Then he asked whether the treasurer was present. She said no. Then he asked whether there was a board packet, meeting minute, or budget amendment authorizing the collection. That question hit harder than the others because there should have been an easy answer if any of this had been legitimate. There was not. I reached into the file one more time and slid out a printed screenshot from the HOA portal, the one Brenda had forgotten to hide before she changed the page header to. Days earlier. It showed the payment line exactly as residents had seen it, summer pool access support. Not enhancement. Not planning. Not reserve. Pool access. Simple words. Direct words. The kind that ruined every excuse she had tried to build. I handed it to Ruiz, and the younger deputy leaned in so quickly his notebook bumped the table. Brenda saw it and went still. Not quiet. Still. Like all the moving parts in her head had finally jammed. That is not the final wording, she said, but even she knew how weak it sounded. Carol let out one short laugh without any humor in it. Mark looked up from his phone and said he had the same wording on his receipt. Then the woman by the fence said hers matched too. The crowd that had come in expecting sun and small talk was gone now, replaced by neighbors doing math in real time. 12 houses at $125 each. More if she had sent it to the full block. More if late fees had already started. I could almost hear the mental calculators clicking behind their eyes. Ruiz asked if anyone had screenshots, emails, or bank records they could forward to the department. Hands went up. Phones came out. A minute earlier Brenda had owned the mood of the patio. Now she looked like a woman watching a floor disappear under her high heels one tile at a time. She tried one last turn, pointing at me and saying I had inflamed the situation by refusing to cooperate with a community solution. That was when Ruiz finally straightened, closed the file, and said, very evenly, calling law enforcement to enforce access to private property you do not control is one matter. Collecting funds under the representation of access to that property is another. Those are not neighborhood misunderstandings. The sentence landed and stayed there. Nobody spoke for a second after that. The pool filter hummed. A moth circled one of the deck lights. Water tapped softly against the tile like a clock counting down. Then the younger deputy asked the neighbors to start sending everything they had, and I realized the thing I had waiting for Brenda was never some dramatic reveal. It was patience, paper, and enough rope for her to tie the knot herself. What happened next moved fast, but not in the loud dramatic way people imagine when they talk about justice. Real justice is paperwork, timestamps, witness statements, and the sound of somebody's confidence draining out one careful question at a time. Officer Rui stepped a few feet away from the patio table and spoke quietly into his shoulder radio. The younger deputy started taking photos of the documents with his department phone, making sure the survey stamp, the email dates, and the HOA payment wording were all visible. Around us, neighbors were pulling up screenshots, bank notifications, forwarded board emails, and payment confirmations with that restless, irritated energy people get when they realize they were not just misled, but used. Brenda tried to gather herself. She smoothed the front of her blouse, lifted her chin, and said she wanted everyone to remain calm until the board could clarify things formally. But nobody was looking at her the same way anymore. The spell had broken. That was the real turning point. Not the deputies. Not the file. The moment people stopped treating her like the voice of order and started seeing her as the source of the mess. Carol showed the deputy the payment request on her phone. Mark found the bank transfer confirmation with the HOA memo line attached. The woman in sunglasses had an email reminder threatening late fees if the assessment was not received by Friday at 5 o'clock. Another neighbor said she had skipped paying because her husband thought the whole thing sounded fishy, and I remember thinking that man deserved a steak dinner and a thank you card. Brenda kept trying to redirect, saying the board would explain accounting classifications at the next meeting, saying internal planning language had been misread, saying I had caused unnecessary hostility by denying access before a community rollout had been finalized. She was still trying to turn a trap she built herself into a misunderstanding. Ruiz came back from the radio and asked for the full HOA board contact list, the treasurer's information, and the management company if one existed. Brenda hesitated just long enough for everybody to notice. Then she gave him a business card from her purse with fingers that were no longer steady. The younger deputy told the neighbors they might be contacted for follow-up statements. He said it plainly, professionally, but that one sentence hit the patio harder than any accusation could have. Follow-up statements. Not neighbor drama. Not a civil spat. Statements. I stood beside the table and watched the blue light from the pool move across the papers Dad had kept safe for 25 years. His permit packet. His deed map. His quiet habit of saving what mattered. Brenda had tried to turn my backyard into a stage for her authority, and instead she had handed law enforcement a neat little stack of motive, misrepresentation, and money. The irony sat there thick as the July heat. A few of the neighbors started leaving then, not because they were bored, but because they had seen enough to understand exactly what this was. Before Carol walked out through the side gate, she looked Brenda dead in the face and said, "You took our money for a pool that was never yours to offer." No shouting. No scene. Just one clean sentence, and it landed harder than anything else that evening. Brenda did not answer. She stared past Carol toward the glowing water like maybe the reflection could give her a different ending. It could not. Officer Ruiz handed me back my documents and told me to keep the original secure. Then he looked at Brenda and said any further attempt to enter or advertise access to this property would create additional problems she really did not want. That was the closest thing to mercy she got all night. When the patrol cars finally rolled away, the blue light slid across the fence one last time and disappeared down the street. The patio went quiet except for the soft rush of the filter and the tiny clicking sound of deck lights warming in the dark. Brenda stood there for another second, alone in a crowd she had brought with her, and for the first time since I had known her, she looked exactly like what she was. Not a leader. Not a gatekeeper. Just a woman who thought nobody would ever make her prove a word she said. The next morning the neighborhood looked exactly the same, and that was the strangest part. The sprinkler still clicked on at 6. The mail truck still rolled through just after 9. Somebody still walked a golden retriever past my front hedge like the world had not shifted 12 inches overnight. But it had. You could feel it in the pauses. In the way people slowed down when they passed Brenda's house. In the way nobody parked in front of the clubhouse that afternoon, even though Tuesday was usually board errand day. Silence tells the truth in neighborhoods like ours. Louder than gossip. Louder than outrage. By 10 o'clock, Carol had already texted me that 3 homeowners were demanding copies of the summer fee notices. By noon, Mark said the treasurer had resigned from the board email thread with a message so carefully worded it practically smelled like attorney advice. By 3, the management company finally answered the voicemail I had left 2 weeks earlier, and suddenly they were very interested in seeing every document I had. Funny how that works. Nobody has time for you while a bully is still standing upright. The second the paperwork starts leaning the other way, everybody finds a calendar opening. I spent most of that afternoon at my kitchen table under the same warm overhead light where Dad used to sort hardware receipts and county tax forms. The blue accordion file sat open beside a legal pad, and the house was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the soft rush of the pool filter outside the back window. I sent scanned copies of the survey, the deed language, Brenda's emails, the portal screenshot, and the budget sheet to the management company, then to the attorney I had lined up the week before. That was another thing Brenda never knew. I had not just been waiting with proof. I had been waiting with counsel. Not because I wanted a fight. Because people like her only stop when the consequences become more expensive than the performance. 3 days later, the board called an emergency meeting at the clubhouse. I did not have to attend to know how it went. Carol called me afterward while I was skimming leaves out of the deep end. I remember the sound of the net dragging through the water while she talked, the sun still hot on the back of my neck, the smell of chlorine and fresh mulch drifting over from the side beds. Brenda had stepped down as president effective immediately. The management company had frozen collection on all summer recreation assessments. Residents who had paid were being issued refunds pending a formal accounting review. There was talk of a forensic audit, which is a wonderfully polite phrase for somebody is about to open every drawer you thought nobody would ever check. Carol said the room had gone dead quiet when the treasurer's replacement confirmed there was no approved vote authorizing pool-related fees tied to my property. No access agreement. No liability contract. No signed use arrangement. Just Brenda, a made-up plan, and a neighborhood she assumed would nod along forever. A week after that, I replaced the side gate lock, installed a new camera over the fence line, and had my attorney send a cease and desist letter so clean and sharp it probably left paper cuts on the way out of the envelope. I never saw Brenda on my patio again. In fact, I barely saw Brenda at all. Her white Lexus stayed tucked in the garage more often. Her walks got shorter. Her smile, when it appeared, looked like something borrowed and uncomfortable. And me, I went back to the things that were mine before she ever tried to touch